All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to OHCOW's second session of our 2022 Mayday Workplace Mental Health webinar series. My name is Patricia Phillips, and I'll be your moderator for today's session, Violence, Harassment, and Bullying in the Workplace. We'd like to begin our session today with a land acknowledgement. So we'd like to begin by expressing our gratitude and acknowledging that we are each gathering on traditional land today. It's important for us all to remember that a land acknowledgement is more than just a symbolic gesture. It's an opportunity to acknowledge and reflect on history and how territories have been defined, as well as the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples and communities and their ongoing relationships with the land. It is also an opportunity for us to reflect on how Indigenous peoples and relations have shaped Ontario's past and continue to influence the province now and into the future. Ontario is located on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples dating back countless generations. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. As each of us are in different locations, we encourage you to reflect on and acknowledge the Indigenous territory and unique history where you are located. We want to show our respect for their contributions and recognize the role of treaty making in what is now Ontario. Thank you. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody, for joining us this morning. And I want to let you know that we are being joined today. Our speakers are Rebecka, Cowen, Forsell, who's Assistant Senior Lecturer in Leadership and Organization at Malmö University from Sweden. We'll be speaking on digital harassment as a new workplace risk. We have John Oudyk, our occupational hygienist at OHCOW, speaking on changes in offensive behavior experience during the pandemic. We have Andrew Politico, sorry, Andrew, Health and Safety Representative, Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU 113, Violence and Harassment in the Workplace. We have Audrey Gilbu, Executive Director, Nokiwin Tribal Council, and Tiffany Rogowski, Health, Safety, and Wellness Advisor from the Nokiwin Tribal Council, speaking on our respectful community. Getting right to it, I'd like to introduce our speakers for the first presentation, Rebecka, Cowen, Forsell, and John Oudyk. Rebecka holds a PhD in Urban Studies and works as an Assistant Senior Lecturer in Leadership and Organization at Malmö University, Sweden. Rebecka Cowen Forsell's research concerns bullying and harassment in working life. She's particularly interested in what is referred to as work-life cyberbullying. For example, negative behavior expressed through digital channels such as email, SMS, or on social media. She's currently leading a research project about digital harassment as a new work environmental risk in schools. And John, many of you know, John has been an occupational hygienist here with OHCOW at the Hamilton Clinic since 1989. And in 2010, John was part of the establishment of the Mental Injuries Tool Group, tasked with developing workplace tools to help workers deal with stress. John also represents Canada on the COPSOC International Network, a group that coordinates and promotes the development of the use of the Copenhagen Psychosocial Questionnaire. Lastly, he's also worked extensively with the CCOHS in developing the website called Stress Assess and a number of smartphone apps based on the COPSOC survey. So with that, I want to turn it over to Rebecka and John. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction, Patricia. So, hi everyone. Very nice to be here and be able to participate at this interesting seminar. I'm doing that from Sweden and the city of Malmö. So it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here, and a nice spring afternoon. But I'm here to talk about my research about cyberbullying and digital harassment. So digital harassment as a new workplace risk. I'm going to base this presentation on 2 empirical and theoretical sources. So one of these sources is my doctoral thesis that I defended about 3 years ago now. It's called Cyberbullying, Transformation, Working Life and Its Boundaries. And this work was something I developed during a time when cyberbullying in working life was a new phenomenon and therefore also new in research. So the aim was then to develop new knowledge on how cyberbullying in working life can be understood and explained. They're also involved in exploring how cyberbullying is related to face-to-face bullying in working life, but also try to identify these new features of bullying that is coming alive with digital and social media. And the other source for my presentation is an ongoing research project where we continue to dwell on the subject of cyberbullying or harassment or online aggressions, as we call it here, but from a specific organizational context. And that is the organizational context of the school. So teachers and principals exposure to online aggression from organizational outsiders. So this is ongoing work, but I will give you some empirical examples based on this. Let's start in the definition then. So we have some kind of shared understanding of what cyberbullying in working life can be about. So here, cyberbullying is defined as negative behavior that is stemming from the work context and occurring through the use of ICTs. And in line then with the traditional understanding of workplace bullying, at least from a European perspective, also cyberbullying is seen here as something that is carried out repeatedly and over a period of time. So something that is systematically conducted. However, contrary to more traditional understanding of workplace bullying, this definition also includes single negative acts to be understood as cyberbullying if it creates this intrusion into someone's private life, if it has this potential of being exposed to a wide online audience. So the reason for why we also include this one-off events is due to the fact that cyberbullying can have very severe consequences for that person who's being targeted. It's related to the fact that some cyberbullying behavior leaves its digital footprints. They can remain on the internet for a very long time. And this workplace behavior, work-related behavior, can also be seen and viewed by people outside this work context. So it's a very large audience can view this negative behavior. But either if this cyberbullying behavior is conducted systematically over time, or if it's one-off events, it's the type of behavior that leaves the target feeling helpless and unable to defend. So when we are dealing with workplace bullying, and when we're trying to handle that and understand it, like in the organization, internal in the organization, it's often colleagues, managers, and subordinates who are those actors that we identify as perpetrators. But with digital communication, a lot of geographical distances are being overcome, and also organizational boundaries becomes more and more blurred. So also these people that we sometimes refer to as organizational outsiders, clients, customers, patients, pupils, the guardians, members of the public even, can then also become actors of work-related cyberbullying, or in different ways negatively inflict the work environment for workers. But when I present my work and when I'm giving lectures about this, I often understand that a lot of people associate cyberbullying in working life with this anonymous type of bullying. And sure, cyberbullying can be anonymously conducted, and that is often what we see when this is occurring between children and adolescents in school environments. But when it comes to working life, this is also related to these platforms that we are interacting with our colleagues, and if these platforms enables this anonymous interaction. So in my empirical material, in my studies about this, and in the context of Sweden, I guess as well, is particularly emails and Facebook. There are these platforms where we have most of this cyberbullying behavior. And this platform doesn't really allow for this anonymous interaction. So in my research about cyberbullying, is often a relationship established between target and offender. But this relationship can look quite differently. So I'm trying to illustrate this with this very simple model here. But if in situations where you have a quite close connection between the target and the offender, for instance, when there are many meetings occurring face-to-face. You might work in the same organization, you might have the same manager and so on. I could see this tendency in my material, and this is based on an interview study that I have done, that you have more this subtle expression of cyberbullying, almost sort of ostracism, excluding type of bullying, cyberbullying behavior. So an example of this then is, for instance, that you have you're repeatedly and over time not having your email responded to, for instance. But if you move along this continuum, as I have here, and look at those narratives that I placed more on the right side, I placed narratives where I have more of a distance in relationship between target and offender. There's still a relationship established, a professional relationship, but there might be less meetings face-to-face. And in these situations, I saw cyberbullying behavior being more aggressively outspoken, more explicitly expressed. So in these cases, it could be about publicly shaming someone on Facebook or exposing someone on social media. So the relationship with the target and offenders still seem to have some kind of influence in how the cyberbullying behavior is expressed. I will now move on and present some of the overarching themes that I identified in my doctoral thesis when I was studying cyberbullying in working life. And these themes trying kind of answer the overall questions for my thesis, which was, how do the characteristics that we associate with bullying in working life change when the bullying behavior is conducted online? So I will present you two of these overarching themes that I was identifying. And the first topic I call new power dynamics in cyberbullying. And that theme discusses how digital communication can transform power relations, and that power relations in cyberbullying differs to some extent from power relations in face-to-face bullying. So this theme was then partly developed from the result of a larger questionnaire that I did, that showed that contrary to traditional face-to-face bullying, there's often described as this downward process where managers, not seldom, is identified as the perpetrator. This study I did actually showed that managers were more exposed to cyberbullying than non-managers. And this was a result that was quite surprising, I must say. There was no much studies about this beforehand, so we didn't know what to expect, but we were quite surprised that managers were more exposed to cyberbullying than non-managers. But after we published this study, we have also seen other studies showing a similar result. For instance, a study from New Zealand also showed that managers are more exposed to cyberbullying than non-managers. So this, of course, makes us think, how can we explain this? What is this about? And this is, of course, complex, but all forms of bullying is about power in some ways. And power can be expressed in multiple ways. So in the physical room, we express bullying with our body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and so on. But online, power to a large extent is expressed through these text-based communications. So there are several benefits from communicating digitally. So unless face-to-face communication, some text-based communication channels have this asynchronous communication. That means that the communication is not immediate. So instead, we have time to build up our arguments and reflect upon our answers in more controlled ways. So in a way, we have more control over how we present ourselves and our message. And this might then perhaps allow people on lower level in the organization to target the manager, for instance. But this theme, power dynamics in working life, also suggests that digital communication blurs boundaries in working life and enables people outside their own work organization, such as patients, pupils and their guardians, students, clients, and so on, to be perpetrators or offenders or actors in these type of situations. And given that managers often is to face outwards in work organizations, it's also, of course, more likely that the managers become more harassed by organizational outsiders. But there is a lot of power involved in both digital and social media, which I'm trying to explain then with this theme. The second theme that I also will talk you through a little bit is what I call platform-specific expressions in cyberbullying. And here I'm trying to stress that cyberbullying cannot only be understood in relation to face-to-face bullying, but the cyberbullying should be understood at platform specific. So internet consists of many different platforms, and each platform kind of creates its own digital space that set the rules for people's behavior, how we interact, and also influence then our attitudes and our behavior. So this theme is then developed from another result in my dissertation that shows this predominance of this passive excluding behavior on emails and quite particularly aggressive behavior on social media. So with this passive behavior, I'm, for instance, referring to this not having email responded to and different types of ostracism, I guess you could say. While on social media, it could be about exposing someone online. So in my thesis then, I argue that the type of audience, but also how well the platform is embedded in the work organization, play a role then in how cyberbullying is expressed. So even though many users tend to include a working relation on Facebook, Facebook is primarily a private platform. And this relatively loose connection to the work organization can then legitimize a more aggressive behavior among users. You may experience yourself as more cut off the norms concerning the workplace. And this also raised a lot of questions about when and in what situation the employer should interact and for how long the responsibility for their work environment that managers responsibility stretch. So should, for instance, a manager interfere in situations that occur between their employees on Facebook on a Friday evening, for instance? But we can come back to that later. So with that background, I'm now going to zoom in to this ongoing project of us where we are trying to understand digital harassment. We also refer to it online aggression sometimes within the organizational context of the school. So educational workers' exposure to online aggressions from guardians, from pupils, but also sometimes then also members of the public. So this is ongoing work, and this is studies primarily based on interviews, doing interviews with educational workers. And here we're also trying to understand what are the work environmental risks, or how is this expressed. And when we're trying to identify this, we see quite different type of online aggressions. On the one hand, we have this aggressive emails from guardians. That was the most common type of online aggressions that they reported or that they received. But it could also be something quite differently, like, for instance, when pupils are taking a video of a teacher in class. And then a third example of online aggressions, they're also quite different from the other two, is these discussions about the school, a situation at the school, and then also including staff at the school indirectly in different Facebook groups. So I will give you some examples of this. So if we start with emails, these were emails. Emails was what was mostly the type of online aggressions that the principals and the teacher experienced the most. And they could, of course, be of different kinds, but they often had this content where they were in different ways trying to tell the teacher and the principals how they should do their job, interfering in different types of decision making. It could be related to grades, but it could also be related to how the school should be organizing, but in different ways telling them how they should do their job. And this could be quite explicit, overtly expressed, like really telling them exactly what they think and what they should do, but it could also be more covertly expressed. And this is was the case in this this quote I will read up for you. And this is a teacher. They work in a school that's located in this strong, socioeconomically strong area. And this is what she says. It's always written correctly, never ugly words, not aggressive words in that way, but well formulated. Still an undertone of you know exactly what they really mean. So what this teacher expressed is not only that this email, aggressively worded email, that could be of different kind, was an attack on her as a person, but also actually on the profession per se, an attack on the teacher profession. But as I said, they could be quite different, express this type of online aggression. So here we have an example of pupils recording or taking a video of a teacher in class. And these were not so, they didn't occur as often, but when it did happen, it had, of course, very severe consequences for the teacher. And in this case here is situations where they're working with digital devices as a tool in the education. And the teachers see how it's these two students who is filming her when or recording this when she's teaching. It's quite obvious what they were doing then. She removed iPads from them, but then afterwards she can see how they have taken photos of her and put up this collage and portray her in a very negative way, making this link to a donkey in this case. And in this case then, there is a quite, the relationship between this teacher and the pupils is quite strained. I guess you can say that this teacher is exposed to some kind of bullying from this pupil. But there is also another example of this in our material when it's much more impersonal. So this is not about targeting a teacher, but it's more about creating situation in the classroom that is filmed and then uploaded on the internet as a way to gain social status among the peers, to get likes online, or potentially become viral. And then our last example of how these online aggressions can be expressed is then on Facebook. So where in the other two examples, the teachers and the principals in different ways are quite directly expressed, this is more indirect talk on Facebook and also platforms that are detached from the work organization. And this is what one teacher say. When they sat there on Facebook and told how one should do and not to do and what a teacher did and didn't do, then you get this desire to go in and say, but come here and work. We need special needs teachers and we need good teachers too. But we couldn't. We were not allowed to go in and respond to it. So this quote also illustrates then how this difficulties when the aggression is kind of being performed behind the back of the principals and the teachers, and also being performed at platforms detached from the work organizations. It creates this ambivalence how to interfere, or even if they should interfere. But it's also this element that if they interfere, then the risk of escalating the situations. So as I said before, it is a lot of power in social media, and it's not only related to negative consequences for the targeted individual, but it can also relate to this. It can also be create bad reputation for the school in general. So some statistics around this then. So if you look at Swedish workers in general, digital harassment is not that common. We see a prevalence rate here around 2.8%. But if you zoom in different professional groups, this prevalence rates increases. So here you see different professional groups within school. Most common in this statistic material is then special needs teachers. So special needs teachers works with pupils that have different kinds of disabilities, and they also work with the parents, which might carry a lot of stress and anxiety and frustration around this. So that might explain why special needs teachers seem to be a vulnerable group in this. But you can also see how it seems to be related to age. It's more common in among primary school teachers than in secondary school teachers, for instance. When it comes to consequences, we can also see that those people, those teachers that have been exposed to digital harassment also report higher level of burnout and stress syndrome, less job satisfaction in comparison to those who have not been exposed to digital harassment. We can also see that they report lower levels in the quality in the work that they are doing, less work engagement. But this is based on this cross-sectional sample, so we actually don't know what is causing what. It could also be that, for instance, if you don't have the ability to provide quality in your work, that you might also receive then more aggressively worded emails. We have now talked about different aspects in relation to cyberbullying and digital harassment, online aggressions. The remaining question is, of course, how do we work with this? What can we learn from this? How can we deal with this in our workplaces? So when it comes to taking measures against this, I don't have any ready methods to present for you today. Maybe this is something you have in Canada, but we don't really have that in Sweden. But we are actually working with developing methods or developing tools around this in this ongoing research project of the school. But meanwhile, I would like to mention for you this guidelines for managing social health risk at work, victimization and bullying, which I was a part of developing. And we published about 6 months ago, and now very recently these were translated into English actually. So it's national guidelines for managing social health risk at work. And the purpose then has been to develop a framework for supporting employers to work and prevent, remedy and follow up victimization and bullying based on research and evidence-based practice. So in these guidelines, cyberbullying and online harassment is like integrated in these recommendations and guidelines that we are providing. So many of the risk factors for workplace bullying are similar for cyberbullying, and often is similar type of measures that managers need to take. So on my last slide, you can, if you're interested, you have a link where you can download these guidelines. So I don't really expect you to be able to read all information on this slide. So this is more of a teaser where what you can read if you're interested in what is preventive side of this. So here we make a difference between what intervention you can do on societal, organizational, team and individual level, and also in relation to the preventive work we're doing in primary prevention. And also secondary prevention, when it's more about having routines for how to follow up this and work with this situation in the workplace. And then, of course, also tertiary prevention is about these recovery procedures. So I know that John has very important and interesting data around digital harassment, and also relating to the pandemic, and also a lot of interesting data when it comes to educational workers. So I will give the floor for John, and he can continue this presentation.
Thanks, Rebecka. Okay, here. I've collected some information from some of the surveys we did during the pandemic. And one of the studies we did was with educational workers, elementary school workers in Ontario, with the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. And between November 23rd and December 21st, in 2020, during the second wave of the pandemic, a long time ago for us, we had almost 6,000 respondents, of which just over 4,000 completed the question about bullying and discrimination at work which was near the end of the survey. And this was the question: have you been exposed to bullying or any kind of harassment at your workplace in the last 12 months? And we define bullying as being repeatedly exposed to unpleasant or degrading treatment that the person finds it difficult to defend themselves against. And it was daily, weekly, monthly, a few times, or not at all. And the results, 2.1% daily, 4% weekly, 2% monthly, and 19% a few times, for a total of 27% for at least a few times, and 73% no, and that was out of 4,190 respondents. And then we also asked, if you were exposed to that, where did it come from? And you could tick off as many sources as you felt appropriate. And you can see they were spread quite evenly amongst co-workers, principals, vice principals, supervisors, students, and then parents, guardians, or caregivers. We also asked whether they found that the level of bullying or harassment had increased or decreased or stayed the same. And 20% said it had decreased, 54% said it had stayed the same, but almost 30% said it had increased. And then we asked people to explain if necessary, and I'll extract some of the comments that we got. So here's how they stack up between people who were education workers who were working remotely or on site. You can see that most of them at that time were on site, although previously in the first wave, everyone had been working remotely. So when I thought which group would be most interesting to look at for cyberbullying, we figured it would be the people who were working remotely and look at their comments. And so here are the comments for remote education workers about bullying or harassment coming from colleagues. Here's a couple of quotes. Staff would ridicule other staff by saying COVID isn't real, or would make comments that the staff contracting COVID aren't hygienic. And this made and make comments and assumptions within the school as to who would be washing their hands enough, etc. And they also, a number of people mentioned that everyone is under stress. And from the manager or the superior, school admin are inexperienced and respond mechanically, spouting board doctrine, and do not listen to online staff needs, which differ from those of in-school staff. And another one, my in-school admin has not managed the additional responsibilities well and takes the stress out on the staff. My virtual school admin have been wonderful. From parents. Parents are generally great, but some emails are aggressive, and I need tech support for them that I don't have. Harassment from a caregiver in our live sessions. Parents take the technology from their child and publicly shame you. Parents are over-empowered and under-informed. They make wrongful accusations, unreasonable demands, and are disrespectful. I feel under constant scrutiny and can see many of them watching and listening throughout the instructional day. I'm a seasoned professional and am treated like a servant. I have never felt less motivated in my 10-year career. I have panic attacks. I've never met an admin face-to-face and don't feel like they're available to help me. I am isolated. With massive classes and untenable workload, plus higher student needs and less special ed support than ever, I often consider resigning. Okay, maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks, John, and thank you, Rebecka. We do have a few questions, but it's very, John and Rebecka, listening to the the different comments that are coming back from teachers. And John, the one that catches my eye most there at the end, about being at home and being isolated, and parents taking the computer away. I never would have thought of that, but in this new experience of the pandemic and working from home, people are getting exposed to this type of bullying and harassment much more. And I don't know if it's really recognized out there as such. So it's good to have these types of sessions to be able to demonstrate really what is going on and what is cyberbullying. It's not just about it's not just about the mean things being said online. There's just so many others, like Rebecka was saying, so many other ways that people are using the technology to bully and harass people. Sorry, so we'll go to the questions here. So we have a question from Deb to Rebecka. Was there a separate category, Rebecka, for substitute teachers researched by chance? Did you do any research on the substitute teachers? And can you please elaborate on some reason why the primary teachers are more harassed?
Yes, so when it comes to the statistics, I can't see more any subgroups more than those I explained, so I don't really know. But and the other question was?
The other question was, can you please elaborate some reasons why the primary teachers are more harassed?
Yes, so I think that is about, because when we did the interview, the main concern when it comes to online aggressions was actually these emails from guardians. So guardians seems to be, or parents seems to be a larger problem, a more common problem in relation to the work environment than the students. When the students were filming, it didn't happen so often. So in primary school, I would say that, at least in Sweden, that the parents might be more involved in the child's education. And the older the children get, they don't interfere so much. So I would say that is the reason that the guardians are more involved in the child's education. That's why we also see that in primary schools, teachers are more exposed. So in the interviews we made, we could see the same tendency, actually.
Yes.
But then it's maybe different problems when and what the emails is about when you move to the more to secondary school, and so when it's also about grades and so on.
Yes, and I wonder if in the secondary school you see more of the, like you were mentioning, Rebecka, you see more of the students filming, doing that type of harassment. The students are now, instead of the parents,
Yes,
being the harassers and the cyber bullies. Yeah,
exactly.
All right, thank you. Next question was from Jennifer, and she was asking, if an employee is being harassed online by another coworker and begins to experience mental health symptoms, would that be considered an occupational illness? Very interesting question. And I guess it depends on the jurisdiction. I'll take a quick, in Ontario, we do have WSIB and we have our chronic mental stress. And so that is something that it could fall under as an occupational health illness, certainly. But any comments from Rebecka or John? Rebecka, in your jurisdiction?
I guess, what you describing there, I would label as bullying, and as part of that legislation, and definitely related to the occupational health. So I would agree with you there, Patricia.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can just jump in. There's no compensation for being bullied, but if that bullying leads to a mental disorder, depression, anxiety disorder, etc., plus the WSIB in Ontario also requires that it be the predominant cause of that disorder, then it is compensable under the chronic stress policy. I'm sure there's somebody from the WSIB who, in the audience, who might be able to expand on this if they wanted to.
if there's anybody that has questions that haven't put in the chat and want to put your hand up or turn on your video, please go ahead. We have something else coming up from Sarah, but we only got some of that. Okay, so please continue. So thank you very much, Rebecka. Thank you very much, John. Fantastic presentation. Great food for thought. I think sometimes people do things like, you know, trying to get the likes and that kind of thing, and not really realizing the impact that it's having on people's lives. So thank you very much for your presentations, much appreciated, and thank you for coming all the way from Sweden. That's fantastic, joining us.